Welcome back, everybody, to day 11.
Woohoo!
Good morning, Penny.
Good morning. How are you?
I'm doing well. How are you?
Good. I spent a little writing practice thing. So I sat down this morning. I had two awful days in a row where I sat there with nothing to say, frustrated, finally gave up. So this morning, I'm like, I don't want to write because nothing's coming to me. But then I hear that voice in my head, all those writers who say, you sit down and you wait because then words will come. If you don't show up. And I had this great writing day, just like pages. So
You remind me. You remind me of the segment on 60 Minutes this week, in which they profiled a sports writer who is retired after covering like 50 Super Bowls and 50 World Series. He was Muhammad Ali's number one journalist. He's interviewed Ali 300 times. And now he's living in a small town and he's writing about the girls' high school basketball team. And it's such a beautiful piece. And they ask him at the end, well, why are you still writing? And here's his exact quote. He says, writers write, and he's like 70 something, 80 years old, and he's still sitting down every day trying to put words on the page. And he's written more about this girls' high school basketball team than he's written about Muhammad Ali. And this is a guy who's won like lifetime achievement awards in all kinds of sports writing. If anybody go back to the 60 Minutes site and take a look at that, I recommend it.
yeah.
So it's just you and me today. So this gives us a little time to catch up.
How disappointing. It's just us.
So we were talking about what we've been reading, and as part of that conversation before we came on, Penny asked me, what are some of the like professional development books that I often go back and reread? And so I'm going to just talk about a book that I've talked about before, and that's Tom Newkirk's book, Embarrassment, which is thin but mighty. And in particular, he's got a chapter here on reading that I have probably reread 5 or 6 times. I go back and look at it all the time. And I love this idea in here that what we really should value as educators and as readers is when you read a book, you take away from that book a feeling state. Like we all have had favorite books that you read years ago. I don't remember the details or every single little, character, but it's the feeling that you take, it's the connection that you take away from the book that is really, really the value of that read. But that's not schools' value. Schools value minute details. Schools value, over analyzing everything. But I don't know. It's just such a evocative look on reading. And it's a chapter in his book, Embarrassment. I recommend it.
What's the subtitle of that book?
And the emotional underlife of learning.
Right, because the thing that I love is that there's a chapter on math shame. It covers kind of the gamut of school, but looks at how embarrassment and shame cloud our ability to learn, our will.
This idea also that, that teachers and standardized tests often are the determiners of what's salient in the book, and instead of the reader determining what's salient in the book, I think is just it's just a really smart way of looking at how we develop lifelong readers.
Well, I was thinking, Kelly, when you were saying like the feeling you take away from a book, a feeling state, right? So imagine now you've got this kind of cynical voice on the other side saying, well, that's not very rigorous to talk about your feelings. Or they would say, like, how do you know the kid's not lying or making it up, right? There's this cynicism, I think, that creeps into how we approach teaching.
Well, I mean, I think that gets to the core of what's our purpose for having kids in the room. Is our purpose for having kids in the room to get them to be able to perform well on the state standardized tests, which boxes in their thinking? Or is it what Kylene and Bob talked about yesterday, to develop kids who will want to pick up a book and develop the ability to read independently because the books speak to them,
I love it when you say things like that. You just like take a big idea and you just like succinctly put it together and I go, yes. Now I want to go write it down and say, I said it. No, I'm kidding.
Yeah.
Um, so I've been rereading The Muses Among Us, Kim Stafford.
Mm.
Again, tiny little book. And in fact, he is on Instagram, puts like a poem a day up. He's the son of William Stafford, poet laureate for 15 years in our country. But this is the one that I've been playing with. It's called The Random Autobiography. And
Mm.
it is one of my favorite exercises that I ever got from him. A list of random moments from your life. That's what got me writing this morning, was a list of these random glimpses, because one glimpse leads to another, leads to another, leads to another. And that led me to what makes me want to revise, right? Don Murray said, you have to want to be willing to reread your writing. And do I want to reread my writing and make it better and better and better? There's lots of things in my notebook I don't bother, but there are things that I definitely do. So finding that state for kids is essential. I have one other book talk. Lupe
Wait. You've piqued my curiosity.
Yes.
So give me a couple of, what are a couple things on his list of random autobiography and what are a couple things on yours?
I swung out on the rope and I thought I would die letting go. These are Kim's. I saw my aunt's true self for the first time the moment she died. I shipped the oars, closed my eyes, and slept. So sometimes they don't tell you really, right? So one of mine, I wandered alone on Sukhumvit, which runs through the center of Bangkok at dusk, stopping to buy chicken satay from a street front grill for 50 cents a stick. That kind of stuff. It's just like, I don't know, 2 pages of stuff I'd like to go back to. But anyway, my second book talk, just because I love this opening line, new middle grade book, Lupe Wong Won't Dance. And this writer is so crafty with language, Donna Barbara Higuera. Listen to this opening line. Like, you know how when you go through like best opening lines ever? My gym shorts burrow into my butt crack like a frightened groundhog.
Thanks for coming today, everybody. We'll see you tomorrow.
Note
Bye-bye.
to
Thank
self,
you.
remember shorts from home so you don't have to wear scratchy school loaners ever again. I can fix this. And then she's yanking it out. Oh my gosh, I love that.
Oh my God, the school loaner. I've forgotten all about that.
Exactly.
Oh my God, I could write pages just on the horrors of the junior high school locker room back in the day.
Oh, you know, I think I've told you, I was playing on the boys basketball team because we didn't have a girls one. So my best friend and I got on the boys team, and our coach was so mad that her dad campaigned to get us on the team that he would not turn the lights on in the locker room for morning practice. So I always think of the locker room at dark with Julia and I in there trying to get our gym clothes on and run out onto the court. Crazy. So we thought we would spend today doing a little quick writing and revising ourselves to kind of look at this practice. And the plan is we've got 2 poems keyed up for a bigger study of love poems. And then we're going to write next to them by hitting pause on the recording so you don't have to sit and watch us write. And then we'll come back together and talk about them. Sound good? Okay, so the first one is a spoken word poem. I'm going to have to share my screen so you can see it. And in this poem, which is by, some of you probably know it, it's one of my favorites. Harry Baker does a poem called 59. And I want to do full screen. Sorry, I should have looked this up. So you can see it. And then we're going to write right after. You don't know this poem, right, Kelly?
Never heard it. So this is real.
Yeah, I'm Harry. I study maths. I write poetry. So I thought I'd start with a love poem about prime numbers. This is called 59. I was going to call it Primetime Loving, but that reaction is why I didn't. So 59. 59 wakes up on the wrong side of the bed. Realizes all his hair's on one side of his head, takes just under a minute to work out that it's because of the way that he slept, he finds some clothes and gets dressed. He can't help but look in the mirror and be subtly impressed how he looks rough around the edges and yet casually messed. And as he glances out the window, sees a side that he is blessed with of 60 from across the street. Now 60 was beautiful, perfectly trimmed cuticles, dressed in something suitable and never rude or crude at all. Unimprovable, right on time as usual, more on cue than a snooker ball, but liked to play it super cool. 59 wanted to tell her that he knew her favorite flower. He thought of her every second, every minute, every hour, but he knew it wouldn't work. He'd never get the girl because although she lived across the street, they came from different worlds. So 59 admired 60's perfectly round figure. 60 thought 59 was odd. You see, one of his favorite films was 101 Dalmatians. She preferred the sequel. He romanticized the idea they were star-crossed lovers. They could overcome the odds and evens because they had each other, while she maintained the strict rules imposed on her by her mother that separate could not be equal. And though at the time he felt stupid and dumb for trying to love a girl controlled by her stupid mum, he should have been comforted by the simple song, take 59 away from 60, and you're left with the one. And sure enough, after 2 months of moping around, 61 days later, 61 was who he found. He had lost his keys and his parents were out, so one day after school he went into a house, and as he noticed the slightly wonky numbers on the door, he wondered why he never introduced himself before. She let him in, his jaw dropped in awe. 61 was like 60, with a little bit more. See, she had prettier eyes and an approachable smile. And like him, rough around the edges, casual style. And like him, everything was in disorganized piles. And like him, her mum didn't mind a friend stayed a while because she was like him. And he liked her. He reckoned she would like him if she knew he was like her, and it was different this time. I mean, this girl was wicked, so he plucked up the courage and asked for her digit. She said, I'm 61. He grinned, said, I'm 59. Today I've had a really nice time, so tomorrow if you wanted, you could come over to mine. She said, sure. She loved talking to someone just as quirky. So she agreed to this unofficial first date. In the end, he was only ready 1 minute early, but that didn't matter because she arrived 1 minute late. And from that moment on, there was non-stop chatter. How they loved X Factor, how they had 2 factors, how that did not matter. Distinctiveness made them better. And by the end of the night, he knew that they went together. On one day, she was talking about stuck up 60. She noticed that 59 looked a bit shifty. He blushed and told her of his crush, the best thing that never happened because it led to us. And 61 was clever, see, not prone to jealousy. She looked him in the eyes and told him quite tenderly, you're 59, I'm 61, together we combine to become twice what 60 could ever be. And at this point, 59 had tears in his eyes. So glad to have this one-of-a-kind girl in his life. He told her the very definition of being prime was the only one in himself could his heart divide, and she was the one he wanted to give his heart to. She said she felt the same, and she knew the films were half true because that wasn't real love. The love was just a sample. When it came to real love, they were a prime example. Cheers.
That's great.
So one thing that I think we make a mistake of, and I don't want to make it here, is we talk too much between the poem and the writing. Do you know what I mean? Like, don't ask kids what to write or tell them what to write. Let's just write. So I'm going to put it on pause. Or do you want to say something?
Although you guys will be back in like 1 second, but we'll be gone for about 3 or 4 minutes as we're going to write. So just hang in there. We'll be right back.
Yep.
Sure.
I just stopped us at 4 minutes and restarted the recording. So for people watching, it feels like boom, but for us, we wrote for 4 minutes. The second, sorry.
Oh, we're going to do the second one before talking about the first one?
I thought we'd do them both, and then we were going to
Okay.
go back and pick one to keep working with. So Kelly's
Sounds good.
the second one, which comes from a favorite poet of ours, Gary Soto. This is one of his collections, You Kissed by the Book, which I adore. My copy of A Fire in My Hands is like tattered. I know it by sight and I can't find it anywhere, but highly recommend his poetry, just beautiful. So this one's called Oranges, and Kelly, you're gonna read it. Let me make it bigger. I hope you can. Ready?
Yeah. Oranges. The first time I walked with a girl, I was 12, cold and weighted down with 2 oranges in my jacket. December, frost cracking beneath my steps, my breath before me, then gone. As I walked toward her house, the one whose porch light burned yellow night and day in any weather. A dog barked at me until she came out pulling at her gloves, face bright with rouge. I smiled, touched her shoulder, and led her down the street across a used car lot and a line of newly planted trees until we were breathing before a drugstore. We entered, the tiny bell bringing a sales lady down a narrow aisle of goods. I turned to the candies, teared like bleachers, and asked what she wanted. Light in her eyes, a smile starting at the corners of her mouth. I fingered a nickel in my pocket, and when she lifted a chocolate that cost a dime, oh, it went away.
I know, because I had put it in two parts. Ready?
I didn't say anything. I took the nickel from my pocket, then an orange, and set them quietly on the counter. When I looked up, the lady's eyes met mine and held them, knowing very well what it was all about. Outside, a few cars hissing past, fog hanging like old coats between the trees. I took my girl's hand in mine for 2 blocks, then released it to let her unwrap the chocolate. I peeled my orange that was so bright against the gray of December that from some distance, someone might have thought I was making a fire in my hands. So once again, we're going to leave you, for you only a couple seconds, but for us for 4 minutes. And so we are going to go ahead and do a little quick writing.
Okay, so a couple quick writes this morning. The thing I love that Linda Reef does is say, quickly reread them and put a star next to the one that has the most heat that you want to go back to. Did you have one that felt like it had more?
Well, it's interesting because one I actually wrote, and one I actually brainstormed possible things to write about. On the 59 poem, I started by trying to I was caught up in his cleverness with his numbers. And so I started to try to write a poem where every line started with a number.
Ooh.
I said, I'm 59. Diane Hallam was 61 as a girl I sat next to in 9th grade high school, right? And I just put next line, 9th grade, 1974, too nervous to approach, for she was beautiful. One time I need to summon my courage. And then it got really lame, so I just abandoned that. And then it led me, though, to a memory that I used to ride my bike to the beach in the summer, and I found out where she lived. This is kind of pre-stalking, right? And so I found out where she lived, and I would just make sure that my bike ride home went past her house, even though that wasn't on my way home. And I was hoping for a chance encounter. So I was writing about that, and it never happened. I never talked to her. I never approached her. I spent a whole year next to her, never connected with her on any level whatsoever. But I hadn't thought about her since a million years ago, since that poem triggered that thought. And then the second one, do you want to talk about your first one as well, or do you want me to keep going?
I'll talk about my first one first. So
Okay.
I thought it was interesting, a love poem about prime numbers. So I instantly had a moment with my husband and prime numbers. So mine's just, my engineer husband is so many things I am not, because he also used the phrase star-crossed lovers. And I think about how different we are. He has to take things apart to know how they work. We have a dismantled pinball machine in our basement right now. Me, I call a repairman every time. I don't want to know how it works. Just fix it. The other night, he tells me he always sets the volume on a prime number, then asks me how many I can name. I'm always being put to these tests I can't pass. I start listing a test I know I'll fail, and he picks up where I falter, listing until I cut him off board. He's brilliant in all the ways I am not. I don't write about him very much at all. So that one was kind of interesting to just be launched. So what'd you do with oranges?
I would say also that it reminded me somehow of the arc of a relationship and how it has a shelf life. Usually reminded me of the movie, I hope I have the title right, The Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind. Remember that film? It kind of brought me to that. On the second one, it's interesting because I've read Oranges before, but I latched onto a phrase, and you don't have to put it back up, but he says something about being in front of the tiered candy there in the store. And that phrase struck me as it's a line in a John Updike poem that I've used for years in my classroom called The Ex-Basketball Player, which is about this kid named Flick Webb, who's this star basketball player, but he never moves beyond his high school glory. And all these years later, he's still living in his high school glory. So John Updike's The Ex-Basketball Player, which is a great poem. But then I kind of went back to the poem and I just thought about that awkward moment where the narrator doesn't have enough money and he looks at the clerk. And I just wrote down awkward date moments. Trying to eat escargot, picking up my date for the Valentine's Day dance in high school, having to meet the parents, prom, having to pin the boutonniere on my date. And finally the mom said, hey, let me do it.
Before you right?
And I'm like, okay, whatever. Calculating the cost of the meal as we're ordering. And of course, the one and the most famous awkward moment is the date drop-off moment. And so I would just leave it at that. And so I and then I came back to that idea because I forgot to say in the Updike poem, he's living in the past. He can't get past his high school glory, and he's in a convenience store, just like this narrator, and he's visualizing the tiers of candy as the crowd that used to cheer for him. So I don't know. I came back around to that. I guess if I had more heat, I'd go back to the first one since this one is still sort of in bullet form. What about you on the second one?
Wow, it's interesting you say that, go into the first one, because I was struck by how your first one is such a free experiment. You're playing with numbers, and how that's what notebook writing allows people to do, is to get comfortable with, like, I can trash it if it doesn't work. I'm just going to try this, and sometimes finding cool stuff. So my second one.
I'm glad you said that. I'm glad you said that though, because we often get asked, well, wait a minute, your kids write stuff you don't read? Yeah. And we both believe all writers need a private place to do something goofy like that dumb poem I just tried to write. But I still love it, but I wouldn't love it if you were reading it or the teacher was marking on it.
Right. No, I actually really love it. And I love it because your sense of just like, ooh, I was having fun with this, and then it kind of went blah, which means you got to revise, right? You had something going, and if you don't like where it went, but I was struck by the awkwardness in Oranges as well. Those first, and I was, the fact that he's trying to pay with 2 oranges made me think of like 5th, 6th grade. So huge, one of my huge first crushes, a date in middle school. Russell and I are walking along Yamhill Street towards his house to play floor hockey in his basement. And it's a date because I am dying for this like individual time with him. We are exactly the same height, because I remember as we're walking to his house, in 2 years, I will tower over him, but he'll take me to the homecoming dance anyway. It's easy to fall in love with the best friend. Russell and I like all the same things: softball, football, the school newspaper, and most of all, basketball. Shooting at the neighborhood hoop until banking it off the telephone pole causes the street light to come on. That's where I ran out of time, but I haven't thought about that kid in so long. We went to different high schools. So when he took me to homecoming as a 9th grader, that was like one of the last times we really spent any time together. And I just wonder, where is he now, all those gazillion years later?
Well, isn't that's a common theme here, the exercise today, is that both of us were brought back to people we had not thought about in years. Mm-hmm. And what does that do for your desire to kind of explore? I mean, for me, it gave me a little, wow, I haven't thought about that. That's very different kind. That's generative writing. That's very different than, responding to teachers' questions kind of writing.
Yeah, and it's short. I mean, if you look at the whole page, those are the 2 quick writes. And
right.
I wouldn't go back to the first one because I've kind of said what I wanted to say about prime numbers and my husband. And I mean, it's just like I don't have anything else there that's driving me. But this piece about being that young, back on Belmont Street where I lived, walking home next to his house, is compelling to me.
And I know this is not the purpose of today, and we'll probably get into this at some later time. We know we get into this deep in our new book that's coming out, but I think we would be remiss if we didn't mention in passing how we use poems. You know, I think a lot of times poems are only introduced in classes as an analysis exercise. And as we've said many times, we like to use poems as launch pads to get kids to put words on the page about things that are meaningful to them.
Yeah, and just that all of revision is driven by a desire to work on that bit of writing, right? If there's no promise there, you can tell me to revise and I'll comply, or I'll do, what am I supposed to revise? I'll wait for you to tell me. But when I want to revise, like my random autobiography, which I really want to play with, that comes because the topic itself drives me, even if it's going nowhere, like nowhere public. I want to keep working. I think that's an essential thing too.
You're right. The number one driver of meaningful revision, do I care?
Exactly. And think about, this is the exact thing that happened with reading, right? Do I care enough to engage with the book? Well, instead, we're over here teaching them strategies and tools to deal with the text when they don't even care about what they're reading. So those tools are meaningless. Strategies are meaningless if they aren't connected to something the kid really wants to understand. So tools and strategies, you could change the word order, you could do whatever. If I don't care about the piece, I'm just doing an exercise. It's not going to stay with me as it will if I'm really trying to make this better. And I want you to hear it and know what I'm saying.
And the other idea is, we just did 2 quick writes, but what if you were in a classroom over the course of a week or a week and a half and kids did 7, 8, 9 quick writes?
Yep.
Then they're going to really find one that they want to go back and spend more time on.
Well, and if you go back to embarrassment at the start, one of the things kids are embarrassed about, especially the ones that I see every year at college, I'm not a very good writer. I don't want to confess, but it's because everything is so high stakes to them, right? Because this is low stakes. You could try out your experiment and you don't mind that it doesn't work out. My kids will sit there being like, I don't know what to write at first because they're afraid to put anything down that isn't going to work. And we have to overcome that with lots of practice.
We've talked about this on the reading side a lot, but it's true on the writing side as well. Like almost goal number 1 is to reestablish writing identity. And in doing that, reestablishing writing fluency, reestablishing the willingness to put words on the page. That has to come first. Like, and it's not a magic wand. We've both had kids. I've talked about one kid for years that I couldn't get him to write for the first 3 months of school, even with this kind of approach. He was a 12th grader and he was so afraid that his writing wouldn't match with anybody else that it took 3 months to figure out. His name was Antonio. Took 3 months to figure out, well, he isn't going to read and grade and criticize it, that I do have a voice. And I'll never forget when he turned in first piece almost at the semester after writing and writing and writing every day. So some kids have been turned off, do not see themselves as writers, that I think poetry is a way to get them back into flexing that muscle again.
Yeah, and I appreciate that you said, which is real life, that some kids don't respond to this right away. I had a similar young man who he would pick up his book and read while everybody else was quick writing. And when I sat down beside him 2-3 weeks into the semester, after several times being like, I hope you'll write something today and all that, and said, how come you're not writing? And he said, I don't want to write about any of the stories that have happened to me. And I was like, oh, because so much of poetry drives you to story. And I had to really think about that. Vary the quick writes so that it's allowing him to enter from a place of information or an infographic or.
Yeah, we should all mention, of course, 180 days. We talk about this a lot, that we do have kids quick write to all kinds of things, you know, graphs, charts, maps, YouTube discussions or TED Talks,
Yeah.
not just poetry. The poetry has been highly successful in getting our most reluctant writers to start writing again.
Well, that's all from here. Looking forward to chat with you tomorrow, unless we have any last thoughts you wanted to mention.
Well, the two poems today were both related to love, and we're going someplace with this tomorrow. And in honor of the current March Madness basketball madness that's happening, we're going to come back and tie poetry into that a little bit tomorrow. So I really look forward to that.
Me too. Have a good rest.
Thanks for joining.
Thanks everybody for joining us.
Thanks everybody. See you tomorrow.